When Eleanor Fisher spent her last $250 on an abandoned lighthouse at a coastal village bankruptcy auction, it was a desperate gamble to provide shelter for herself after losing everything. Following her husband's sudden death and the crushing medical bills that consumed their savings, she never imagined that behind a hidden panel in the lighthouse keeper's quarters, she would discover a secret basement containing meticulously preserved World War II naval maps, tactical annotations, and a personal journal belonging to Admiral James Harrison documents, revealing previously unknown Allied naval strategies and identifying the locations of unrecovered shipwrecks containing historical artifacts and precious metals worth millions. A discovery that would make her the target of international treasure hunters, thrust her into high-stakes negotiations with naval historians and museum curators, and ultimately lead to a joint expedition with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration that would forever change how America preserves and honors its maritime military history. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The foreclosure notice arrived on a foggy Thursday morning, tucked between an electric bill and a community newsletter, as if its life-shattering contents were just another mundane piece of mail. Notice of eviction. 30 days to vacate premises. Eleanor Fisher stared at the bold red letters, feeling her world collapse as she stood in the small kitchen of her one-bedroom cottage. Through the window, she could see the turbulent gray ocean that had been both companion and tormentor since Daniel's passing 6 months ago. "Not now," Eleanor whispered, scanning the document for any possible exception or extension. There wasn't one. The entire row of beachfront cottages had been sold to developers planning a luxury resort. All residents had 1 month to find new housing. No exceptions, no extensions. At 58, Eleanor hadn't imagined she would be here. A widow with a teaching degree, recently forced into early retirement when her small coastal school consolidated, and now facing homelessness in a rental market that seemed designed to exclude people exactly like her. She placed the eviction notice on the counter and took a deep breath, mentally calculating her options. Her savings had dwindled to just under $300 after months of medical bills and funeral expenses. Her sister lived across the country and was in no position to help. Friends had already assisted as much as they could during the initial weeks after Daniel's death. Eleanor moved to the living room window, gazing out at the lighthouse that stood sentinel on the rocky point beyond her cottage. For 30 years, it had been the backdrop to her marriage with Daniel, its beams sweeping over their cottage each night like a protective guardian. Now it was as abandoned as she felt, decommissioned 5 years ago when automated navigation systems had rendered human lighthouse keepers obsolete. She picked up the framed photograph of Daniel and herself on their wedding day, his Coast Guard uniform crisp and formal beside her simple white dress. "What would you do now, my love?" she asked the silent image. That night, after a simple dinner she could barely taste, Eleanor opened her laptop and began the desperate search for affordable housing. The numbers on the screen mocked her. Studio apartments rented for nearly twice what she currently paid for her one-bedroom cottage. Application fees alone would quickly deplete what remained of her savings. Every listing demanded proof of income. 3 times the monthly rent, impossible on her meager retirement benefits that barely covered groceries and essential expenses. She expanded her search radius, looking at towns farther inland, places with longer drives to potential part-time jobs, areas with higher crime rates, anywhere that might have something, anything she could afford. Each option seemed worse than the last. By 1:15 a.m., desperation drove her to search bankruptcy auctions, foreclosed properties, abandoned buildings, distressed real estate being liquidated to recoup debts. Most were dilapidated houses requiring massive renovations or vacant lots in remote areas, and then she saw it. Former Point Harbor Lighthouse and Keeper's Quarters. Minimum bid $200, sold as is. Eleanor almost scrolled past it. What would she do with an abandoned lighthouse? But something made her click on the listing. There were only 5 photos. The weathered lighthouse tower with its faded white paint and rusted metalwork. The attached keeper's quarters with boarded windows. The interior of the quarters showing dusty furniture and peeling wallpaper. The spiral staircase leading to the lantern room. And an aerial view showing the property on a rocky promontory extending into the harbor. The description was sparse. Former Point Harbor Lighthouse. Tower plus 1,200 square feet keeper's quarters. Property includes all remaining fixtures and furnishings. Structure sound but needs significant renovation. No utilities currently connected. Zoned historical with residential allowance. Property sold as is. Eleanor's exhausted mind began to calculate improbable possibilities. The keeper's quarters could be made livable with some work. The tower itself might never be functional again, but the attached living space had potential. The historical zoning meant there would be restrictions on external modifications, but it also meant certain tax benefits for restoration efforts. It was insane. She was a retired schoolteacher, not a contractor or engineer. The property was isolated, accessible only by a narrow causeway that flooded during the highest tides. And yet, what if this was her only option? What if $200 or whatever the final bid might be was the price of never having to worry about a landlord's whims again? This is absolutely crazy, she told herself, closing the laptop. But as she lay in bed listening to the waves crash against the shore, the idea refused to fade. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. By morning, what had seemed like midnight madness had crystallized into her best, perhaps only option for housing security. Eleanor withdrew $250 from the bank, nearly everything she had left, and drove her aging Ford Focus to the county courthouse, rehearsing arguments to convince herself this wasn't the most desperate gamble of her life. The county courthouse was an imposing stone building with wide granite steps leading to heavy wooden doors. Eleanor arrived 30 minutes early, clutching her bitter registration papers and trying to look more confident than she felt. The auction room was already half filled with people in business attire, professional investors and developers who did this regularly. "First auction?" asked a silver-haired man with kind eyes, noticing Eleanor nervously adjusting her bitter paddle. Eleanor nodded. "Is it that obvious?" "We all start somewhere," the man said, introducing himself as Howard Brennan. "Been attending these auctions for over 15 years. Looking for anything specific today?" "Actually, yes," Eleanor admitted. "The old Point Harbor Lighthouse." Howard's eyebrows rose. "Interesting choice. Those historical properties can be challenging, but that lighthouse has good bones. What are you planning to do with it?" "Live in it," Eleanor said, then quickly added, "Restore the keeper's quarters first, then gradually work on the tower." Instead of laughing, Howard nodded thoughtfully. "Makes more sense than you might think. That property has stood against Atlantic storms for over a century. The quarters were built solid, and the location is spectacular. The hard part is utilities and making it properly livable." "I'm a retired teacher," Eleanor said, "with some basic renovation skills from helping my late husband with projects over the years. I know it's unconventional, but I'm out of conventional options." "Unconventional is how preservation happens," Howard interrupted. "And between us, I doubt you'll have much competition for that property. Most developers want quick flips in residential neighborhoods, not long-term projects with historical restrictions." Howard's prediction proved accurate. When Lot 22, Point Harbor Lighthouse, came up for auction, the room remained quiet after the auctioneer announced the minimum bid of $200. Eleanor raised her paddle, heart hammering in her chest. $200 from Bidder number 17, the auctioneer announced. Do I hear $225? A woman in a Navy business suit casually raised her paddle. $225 from bidder number 4. Do I hear $250? Eleanor raised her paddle again, silently calculating that this was her absolute limit. $250 from bidder number 17. Do I hear $275? The room remained silent. Eleanor felt sweat beading on her forehead. $250 going once, going twice. The auctioneer scanned the room. Sold to bidder number 17 for $250. The sharp crack of the gavel made Eleanor jump. Had that really just happened? Had she actually purchased a lighthouse for less than the security deposit on most apartments? The next hour passed in a blur of paperwork, signatures, and transaction processing. The county clerk explained that the property had been abandoned for nearly 7 years. With property taxes unpaid since the Coast Guard had decommissioned it and transferred ownership to the county, which had failed to find a preservation partner. Interested in the history? You'll need to file for historical preservation tax credits if you're planning to restore it, the clerk advised. And you might need engineering assessments. These old structures sometimes have structural issues from constant exposure to salt air and storms. By noon, Eleanor Fisher, widow, retired schoolteacher, and now owner of a defunct lighthouse, clutched a set of keys and property deed in hands that wouldn't stop trembling. "Congratulations," Howard said, finding her in the courthouse hallway. "That's quite an adventure you're embarking on." "I'm still not sure if I'm brilliant or desperate," Eleanor admitted. "Sometimes those qualities are two sides of the same coin," Howard replied with a wink. "Here's my card. I've done some unusual renovations over the years, including converting an old train station into a home. Call me if you need advice or contractor recommendations." Eleanor thanked him and headed directly to her car. She couldn't wait to see her property up close. The drive took her along increasingly narrow coastal roads, past fishing villages and summer cottages until she reached the causeway leading to Point Harbor Lighthouse. The tide was low, allowing safe passage along the narrow strip of land connecting the lighthouse to the mainland. The limestone tower stood proudly against the blue sky, its white paint weathered but still visible, the glass lantern room at the top reflecting sunlight like a beacon. The attached keeper's quarters was a 2-story stone building that matched the tower, with a steep roof and shuttered windows facing the ocean. Using the key from the auction, Eleanor unlocked the heavy wooden door to the keeper's quarters. The smell hit her first, the distinctive scent of a long-abandoned space. Salt, dust, and old wood. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the boarded windows, illuminating floating dust particles and casting long shadows across the wooden floor. The main living area was approximately 20 feet square, with a stone fireplace along one wall. Abandoned furniture remained, draped in dusty sheets. A dining table, chairs, a writing desk, and bookcases built into the walls. A narrow hallway led to what had been the kitchen, a small room with an ancient cast-iron stove, a sink with a hand pump, and open shelving along the walls. Beyond that was another room that might have been a pantry or storage area. A steep staircase led to the second floor, which contained 2 bedrooms with iron bed frames still in place, and a small bathroom with a clawfoot tub and pedestal sink. A door at the back of the lower hallway connected the quarters to the lighthouse tower itself, where a spiral staircase wound upward to the lantern room. 87 steps that Eleanor counted as she climbed carefully, testing each metal step before trusting it with her full weight. The lantern room at the top took her breath away, not just from the climb, but from the panoramic view of the Atlantic Ocean stretching to the horizon. The massive Fresnel lens had been removed when the lighthouse was decommissioned, but the metal framework remained, along with the rotation mechanism that had once turned the light. As a teacher, Eleanor assessed the space with a practical eye. The structure appeared sound despite its age. The stone walls were solid. The roof didn't show signs of major leakage, and the wooden floors, while worn in places, were intact. The plumbing would need work. The electrical system, a complete overhaul. But the bones were good. With careful planning and gradual improvements, this could indeed become a home. She was examining the kitchen space, mentally converting it into a functional modern cooking area, when something caught her attention. The wall behind where an old refrigerator had stood didn't look quite right. Most of the interior walls were plaster over stone, but this section had different texturing, and the baseboard didn't quite match the rest of the room. Curious, Eleanor examined the wall more carefully, running her fingers along the edge where it met the floor. She felt a slight draft impossible for an interior wall unless it wasn't solid all the way through. Pressing against different sections of the wall, she noticed one panel gave slightly under pressure. Eleanor's teaching career had included years of American history, including units on maritime history and coastal defense. She knew that many lighthouses, especially those built during war times, had served dual purposes as navigational aids and coastal observation posts. Some had been equipped with hidden storage areas or communication rooms, particularly during World War II when German U-boats patrolled the Atlantic seaboard. Looking more closely at the panel, Eleanor noticed a small metal plate near the floor that appeared to be decorative, but didn't match any other fixtures in the room. Pressing it experimentally, she felt it give way under her touch. A soft click emanated from inside the wall, and the panel shifted inward slightly. Heart racing, Eleanor pushed against the panel, which swung inward on hidden hinges to reveal a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Using the flashlight on her phone, she illuminated stone steps leading down below the keeper's quarters, into what must be a basement or cellar not mentioned in any of the property documentation. The staircase was solidly constructed, each step carved from a single block of stone. Counting as she descended, Eleanor reached 15 steps before the stairs opened into a room approximately 12 feet square with a low ceiling that forced her to stoop slightly. Unlike the abandoned living spaces above, this room showed signs of deliberate preservation. Metal filing cabinets lined one wall, their surfaces free of the dust that covered everything upstairs. A large table occupied the center of the room, its surface protected by a heavy canvas covering. Along another wall stood a wooden chest with brass fittings and a serious-looking lock. Eleanor approached the table first, carefully removing the canvas cover to reveal what lay beneath. She gasped at the sight. Spread across the table's surface was a large-format naval map of the Atlantic Ocean, focused on shipping lanes between North America and Europe. The map was covered with handwritten annotations, tactical markings, and color-coded pins still embedded in specific locations. The map appeared to be from World War II, showing convoy routes, naval patrol sectors, and most surprisingly, locations marked with red X's labeled with dates and cryptic annotations like U-512 confirmed or Liberty Ship Matheson. Cargo manifest. B7. Moving to the filing cabinets, Eleanor discovered they were unlocked. The first drawer she opened contained folders organized by date, each holding detailed reports, smaller maps, and what appeared to be surveillance photographs of vessels. The label on the drawer read North Atlantic Theater, 1942-1, 1943, ADMJH. The second cabinet contained similar materials for 1944 to 1945, while a third held what appeared to be personal correspondence and handwritten journals. All the materials were in remarkable condition, preserved in the cool, dry environment of the as a desirable condition, preserved in the cool, dry environment of the sealed underground room. The wooden chest proved more challenging, its lock resistant to her initial attempts to open it. Eleanor made a mental note to return with better tools, though she already suspected what it might contain based on the Room's contents likely the personal effects of whoever had maintained this hidden archive. As she carefully returned the canvas covering to the map table, Eleanor noticed a photograph in a simple frame hanging on the wall near the staircase. The image showed a naval officer in full dress uniform standing in front of Point Harbor Lighthouse. The officer's stern expression contrasted with the pride evident in his posture, one hand resting on a leather-bound journal, similar to those she had found in the filing cabinet. The inscription at the bottom of the photograph read, "Rear Admiral James Harrison, Naval Intelligence, Eastern Seaboard Defense Command, 1944. Eleanor stared at the image, pieces falling into place in her historian's mind. Admiral Harrison had been a significant figure in naval intelligence during World War II, responsible for coordinating convoy protections against German U-boat attacks. His tactics had saved countless ships and lives, though much of his work remained classified even decades later. What she had stumbled upon was clearly his personal archive maps, reports, and journals that documented his work during the war years, stored in a secure location away from both Washington bureaucracy and potential enemy agents. With growing excitement and trepidation, Eleanor realized the historical significance of her discovery. These materials might contain information never included in official naval archives, perspectives and details that could reshape understanding of Atlantic naval operations during World War II. Beyond historical significance, she recognized that some of the map annotations appeared to mark shipwreck locations, vessels sunk during the war, their positions recorded with precision unusual for that era. Modern salvage operations would consider such information invaluable, particularly for locating wrecks containing valuable cargo or historical artifacts. As she carefully made her way back up the stone stairs and secured the hidden panel behind her, Eleanor's mind raced with implications. Her $250 lighthouse hadn't just provided potential shelter. It had given her access to historical materials that could be academically priceless and possibly lead to valuable shipwreck discoveries. The sun was beginning to set as Eleanor locked up her new property and returned to her car. As she drove back along the causeway, watching the lighthouse silhouette against the darkening sky in her rearview mirror, she felt something she hadn't experienced since before Daniel's diagnosis. Hope. That night, back in her soon-to-be former cottage, Eleanor researched Admiral James Harrison, finding limited but consistent information. A distinguished naval career spanning 4 decades, significant contributions to convoy protection strategies during World War II, and a reputation for meticulous record-keeping and unconventional tactics. After the war, he had served on various naval intelligence committees until his retirement in 1957, after which public records showed he had purchased a property near Point Harbor, almost certainly the lighthouse where he had established his hidden archive. Eleanor's research shifted to maritime salvage law and historical preservation requirements. The legal landscape was complex, with overlapping jurisdictions between state historic preservation offices, the Navy's historical department, and various federal agencies responsible for coastal waters and shipwrecks. One thing became clear: she needed to be careful about how she proceeded. The discovery in her lighthouse could attract attention from multiple directions, not all of it welcome or benevolent. Treasure hunters and private salvage operations would be interested in the shipwreck locations. Academic institutions would want access to the historical materials. Government agencies might assert claims on documents they considered still sensitive. Her simple housing solution had suddenly become considerably more complicated. And yet, as she continued her research into the early morning hours, Eleanor began to see how Admiral Harrison's meticulous records might provide her with options she hadn't previously imagined. The next morning, Eleanor called Howard Brennan, the experienced renovator she'd met at the auction. Over coffee at a local diner, she shared her plans to restore the lighthouse keeper's quarters as her new home, carefully omitting any mention of her discovery beneath the kitchen. "The structure is surprisingly sound," she explained, "but I'll need guidance on bringing utilities back online and making the space livable." Howard was enthusiastic about the project. Historical properties like this have special grant programs available through preservation societies. The lighthouse's age and architectural significance make it eligible for funding that could offset much of your renovation costs. This was welcome news Eleanor hadn't considered. How would I apply for these grants? The Maritime Historical Society would be your first stop, Howard advised. Their director, Dr. Sophia Chun, specializes in New England coastal structures. I've worked with her on several lighthouse preservation projects. By afternoon, Eleanor had an appointment with Dr. Chen for the following day and a list of potential contractors experienced with historical renovations. She also had a growing plan for how to approach her underground discovery. That evening, Eleanor returned to the lighthouse with basic supplies: battery-powered lanterns, a small propane heater, cleaning materials, and tools to better examine the hidden room and its contents. The tide was higher than during her previous visit, the causeway partially submerged, forcing her to time her crossing carefully between wave sets. Once inside, she made her way directly to the hidden panel, opening it more confidently this time and descending to Admiral Harrison's secret archive. With better lighting from her lanterns, the room revealed more details she had missed during her initial discovery. A small desk in one corner held what appeared to be a logbook, its pages filled with daily entries spanning from 1942 to 1957, 15 years of observations, notes, and personal reflections. Eleanor carefully turned the brittle pages, reading entries that ranged from strategic naval assessments to weather observations, to philosophical musings on war and peace. One entry from May 1945 caught her attention. "Victory in Europe declared. Today, the Atlantic Theater has cost us dearly. 2,779 merchant vessels sunk according to current tallies, though my own records indicate the number is closer to 2,910 when accounting for unconfirmed losses. The location data I've compiled represents not just strategic information but a maritime graveyard map. These vessels and their brave crews deserve to be remembered properly, not lost to bureaucratic imprecision or wartime secrecy." Another entry from 1957, near the end of the logbook, proved even more intriguing. "Upon my retirement today, I have completed the transfer of all official materials to Naval Intelligence Archives, save for my personal records and the specialized charts maintained here at Point Harbor. The official history will record what Washington deems appropriate, but my archive will preserve the unvarnished truth of our Atlantic operations, including convoy routes, engagement outcomes, and precise wreck locations, particularly those carrying significant historical or material value. Future generations may find purpose in recovering these lost vessels when technology permits safer exploration than currently possible." The logbook confirmed Eleanor's initial assessment. Admiral Harrison had deliberately preserved records he considered historically significant, including detailed information about valuable shipwrecks that remained undiscovered. His final entries suggested he had intended this archive to be found eventually, though perhaps not by a retired schoolteacher seeking affordable housing. Turning her attention to the locked wooden chest, Eleanor examined it more carefully under the lantern light. The brass lock was substantial but old, its mechanism potentially susceptible to the right tools. Among the supplies she had brought was a small pry bar, which she carefully positioned at the chest seam. With controlled pressure, the aged wood around the lock fixture cracked slightly, and the lid lifted to reveal the chest's contents. Inside lay several bound journals, their leather covers embossed with Admiral Harrison's initials, a collection of medals and military insignia carefully arranged in a velvet-lined tray, several rolled documents secured with ribbon, and beneath these items, a metal box with a simpler lock than the chest itself. Using a screwdriver, Eleanor was able to manipulate the box's lock open. Inside she found several envelopes containing photographs, personal letters, and most surprisingly, a detailed manifest listing 23 specific shipwrecks with annotations about their cargo contents. Notable entries included Liberty Ship, William Crampton, sunk February 1943, position marked map C7, cargo manifest, 2,300 tons industrial diamonds intended for precision manufacturing. Estimated current value, substantial. Recovery priority, high. SS Westmoreland, sunk October 1944. Position marked map D12. Cargo manifest. Art collection from Rotterdam museums. Evacuated ahead of German occupation, including Rembrandt and Vermeer works. Historical value, incalculable. Recovery status, never attempted. Depth approximately 3,200 feet. The manifest represented potentially billions in recoverable materials and historical artifacts, their locations precisely documented in the maps spread across the center table. Information that would be invaluable to salvage operations, museums, and historical preservation efforts. As Eleanor carefully returned the materials to their places, securing the chest as best she could after her examination, she realized that her lighthouse held far more than just shelter. It contained information that could fund not just her renovation, but potentially secure her financial future entirely if approached correctly. Preparing to leave, Eleanor noticed something she had overlooked during both previous visits. A small metal plaque mounted beside the entry staircase, its inscription, reading, "Knowledge preserved serves no purpose unless shared. Wisdom is knowing when and how to share it." J.H. Admiral Harrison had created this archive not to hide information permanently, but to preserve it until it could be properly utilized. The question now was how Eleanor would honor that intention, while protecting both the historical significance of the materials and her own interests. The causeway was nearly submerged when she left the lighthouse, her car's tires sending spray into the evening air as she carefully navigated the narrowing path to the mainland. The headlights caught the lighthouse tower in her rearview mirror, its silhouette now representing something far more complex than simple shelter. Eleanor spent that night organizing her approach to the various aspects of her situation. The lighthouse renovation would proceed transparently, with proper permits and preservation grants if available. The discovery of Admiral Harrison's archive would require more careful handling, beginning with consultation with appropriate historical experts who could authenticate the materials without immediately triggering a free-for-all of competing claims. Dr. Sophia Chun of the Maritime Historical Society seemed the logical first contact. As a respected academic without direct ties to salvage operations or government agencies, she could provide expert assessment while helping navigate the complex legal and historical implications. The following morning, Eleanor met Dr. Chun at the Society's offices in a converted waterfront warehouse. The historian was younger than Eleanor had expected, perhaps in her early 40s, with a brisk, efficient manner and obvious passion for maritime preservation. "Mr. Brennan speaks highly of your lighthouse project," Dr. Chun said after initial introductions. "Point Harbor is an excellent example of mid-19th century coastal architecture with significant historical value. I'm committed to restoring it properly," Eleanor replied, carefully choosing her next words. "In fact, I've already discovered some interesting historical elements that weren't mentioned in the property listing." Dr. Chun's interest visibly heightened. "That's often the case with these structures. What have you found?" Eleanor took a calculated risk. "Documents and materials that appear to have belonged to Admiral James Harrison, who owned the lighthouse after his naval career. I believe they're historically significant and wanted to consult with an expert before proceeding." The historian's eyes widened. Admiral Harrison? His tactical innovation saved countless lives during the Battle of the Atlantic. Any personal papers would be of considerable academic interest. She paused, studying Eleanor carefully. "What sort of materials are we discussing?" Maps, journals, tactical annotations, what appears to be his personal archive from his naval intelligence work. I wanted to ensure they're properly preserved and evaluated by qualified experts. This deliberately vague description omitted the shipwreck locations and potential salvage value, focusing instead on the historical significance that would most interest an academic like Dr. Chun. The historian's response was measured but enthusiastic. The Society would be very interested in assessing these materials. We have conservation specialists who could help preserve fragile documents, and our research team could begin evaluating their historical significance. I'd welcome your expertise, Eleanor said carefully, though I want to maintain appropriate oversight as the property owner. Perhaps you could visit the Lighthouse to make an initial assessment before any materials are removed for conservation. Dr. Chun agreed readily to this approach, and they scheduled a visit for the following afternoon. As they finalized details, the historian offered unexpected information. You should know that your lighthouse has been of interest to several organizations over the years. The Navy's Historical Division made inquiries about purchasing it in the 1980s, but were deterred by county requirements for public access if they took ownership. This revelation added another layer to Eleanor's understanding. The Navy had potentially known about Harrison's archive, but had been unable to secure the property. Now that it was privately owned, different rules would apply to any materials discovered there. As Eleanor left the meeting, her phone pinged with an email notification. The sender was unfamiliar, Thomas Garrett at navalhistory.gov. The message was brief, regarding your purchase of Point Harbor Lighthouse. Historical Preservation Division would appreciate consultation regarding any materials of naval significance discovered on the property. Please call 202-555-0142 at your earliest convenience. The timing was too precise to be coincidental. Someone had notified the Navy about her meeting with Dr. Chun, or they had been monitoring property transfers and had only now connected her purchase with their historical interest in the lighthouse. Eleanor decided not to respond immediately. She needed more information and a clearer strategy before engaging with an organization that might assert claims on her discovery. Instead, she focused on practical next steps for the lighthouse renovation. A local contractor recommended by Howard provided an initial assessment of the work required to make the keeper's quarters habitable. The estimate was substantial, but not prohibitive if she could secure preservation grants. The most immediate needs were weatherproofing, utility connections, and basic structural reinforcements to ensure safety. The place has good bones, contractor concluded, echoing Howard's earlier assessment. These old buildings were built to last. With the right approach, you could have the living quarters comfortable within 2 months. The tower would be a longer-term project. Eleanor signed a preliminary agreement for the essential safety work, carefully budgeting her limited remaining funds while awaiting word on grant applications. She would need to find temporary housing when her cottage eviction date arrived. But Howard had generously offered his guest room as a short-term solution. That evening, Eleanor returned to the lighthouse feeling an increasing sense of ownership and possibility with each visit. The hidden room beneath the kitchen drew her attention once again, this time with a specific purpose. If Dr. Chun would be visiting tomorrow, and the Navy was already making inquiries, she needed to document the archive thoroughly for her own protection. Using her phone, Eleanor photographed each map, document, and journal entry of significance, paying particular attention to the shipwreck manifest and location markers. She wasn't entirely sure how she would use this information, but having her own complete record seemed prudent before allowing others to assess the materials. As she carefully photographed a detailed map of convoy routes, Eleanor noticed something she had previously overlooked. Small notations in the map margins referenced a secondary archive and duplicate records maintained at secondary location. See personal journal. The 7th of December 43. Returning to the filing cabinets, she located the journal covering December 1943 and Found the entry for December 7th, the anniversary of Pearl Harbor. Admiral Harrison had written, "Established secondary secure location today at coordinates known only to myself. Primary materials remain at Point Harbor, but key strategic information now has redundant preservation at facility, be in the event of compromise or necessity. Activation protocol documented in Red Folio, Section 3. The referenced Red Folio took some time to locate, eventually found in a slim document case tucked behind the larger filing cabinets. Inside was a sealed envelope marked Activation Protocol, Facility B, with instructions that it should only be opened if the primary archive was threatened. The existence of this secondary archive added another layer of complexity to her discovery. Whatever Admiral Harrison had preserved here might be only part of a larger collection of materials stored elsewhere, their location known only through information contained in this room. Eleanor decided to leave the sealed envelope untouched for now. Disturbing, it seemed premature without a clearer understanding of what she was dealing with, and what threats might constitute necessity by Harrison's standards, as she completed her documentation and prepared to leave. Eleanor noticed headlights on the causeway, visible through one of the keeper's quarters windows. The tide was relatively low, making crossing possible, but she wasn't expecting anyone at this hour. Quickly securing the hidden panel and gathering her belongings, Eleanor moved to a position where she could observe without being immediately visible. A black SUV with government plates had parked at the base of the lighthouse, and two men in dark suits were approaching the building. Their timing and appearance suggested they were likely from the Naval Historical Division that had emailed her earlier. Their unannounced arrival, however, demonstrated a concerning level of urgency and potential overreach. Eleanor had several options. She could make her presence known and deal with them directly. She could remain hidden and observe their actions. Or she could attempt to leave unnoticed via the service door at the rear of the keeper's quarters that led directly to a narrow path down to the shoreline. Choosing the third option, Eleanor quietly made her way through the darkened building to the rear exit. Years of teaching had given her the ability to move silently when monitoring student exams, a skill now serving an entirely different purpose. As she slipped out the back door and carefully picked her way down the rocky path to the shore, she heard the men entering the lighthouse through the main entrance. Their flashlight beams swept through the windows above her as she kept low and moved along the shoreline until she reached a point where she could circle back to her car unobserved. From a distance, she watched as the men spent approximately 20 minutes in the lighthouse before returning to their vehicle and departing. Their brief visit suggested they hadn't discovered the hidden room. They were likely conducting a preliminary assessment of the property before making more formal contact with her. This uninvited inspection confirmed Eleanor's instinct to proceed carefully. Various interests were converging on her lighthouse and its secrets, each with their own agenda that might not align with hers. As the legitimate property owner, she had certain rights, but those rights would be tested against national security interests, historical preservation claims, and maritime salvage laws. As she drove back to her cottage, Eleanor's mind raced with implications and potential strategies. Admiral Harrison's archive represented not just historical documents but potentially enormous financial value through the shipwreck information. That value could secure her future and fund full restoration of the lighthouse, but only if she navigated the complex legal and institutional landscape correctly. What had begun as a desperate bid for affordable housing had evolved into something far more complex, a high-stakes game involving naval intelligence history, sunken treasure, and competing institutional interests. And at the center of it all was a retired schoolteacher who had spent her last $250 on a lighthouse at a county auction. The foreclosure of her cottage seemed almost insignificant now compared to the possibilities and challenges her lighthouse presented. As she prepared for bed, Eleanor found herself wondering what Admiral Harrison would do in her position. How the strategic mind that had protected Allied shipping against German U-boats would navigate these turbulent waters. The answers seemed to emerge from her memory of his plaque in the hidden room. Knowledge preserved serves no purpose unless shared. Wisdom is knowing when and how to share it. She would share this discovery, but on her terms, with carefully chosen partners who would respect both the historical significance and her rights as the property owner. The pieces were in motion now, and Eleanor Fisher, lighthouse keeper and guardian of secrets, needed to chart her course carefully through the approaching storm. Dr. Sophia Shun arrived at Point Harbor Lighthouse precisely at the scheduled time, her compact research vehicle navigating the causeway with practiced ease. Eleanor had spent the morning preparing for this critical meeting, carefully considering how much to reveal about Admiral Harrison's archive. The Historical Society has been hoping someone would restore this property, Dr. Chun said as Eleanor led her through the keeper's quarters. These lighthouses are irreplaceable maritime heritage. Eleanor provided a brief tour of the main living spaces, discussing her renovation plans and the structural assessment she'd received. Dr. Chun offered helpful suggestions about historical accuracy and preservation techniques, clearly impressed by Eleanor's commitment to maintaining architectural integrity. You mentioned finding documents related to Admiral Harrison, Dr. Chun said finally, her professional interest evident. That could significantly enhance the historical value of your restoration project. Eleanor nodded, leading the historian to the kitchen area. I discovered something unexpected during my initial inspection. She pressed the hidden panel, revealing the concealed staircase. Dr. Chun's eyes widened in genuine surprise. A hidden basement? That's not in any of the lighthouse architectural records. It appears Admiral Harrison had it constructed after purchasing the property, Eleanor explained, leading the way down the stone steps. What I found inside raises some interesting historical questions. The historian's gasp was audible as they entered the archive room and Eleanor illuminated it with battery-powered lanterns. Dr. Chun moved immediately to the map table, her trained eye recognizing the significance of the materials before her. This is extraordinary, she whispered, carefully examining the annotated naval charts. These appear to be Admiral Harrison's personal tactical maps from the Battle of the Atlantic. The detail is remarkable, far more precise than the official naval archives I've studied. Eleanor watched carefully as Dr. Chen moved methodically around the room, examining documents with growing excitement. She deliberately directed the historian's attention to the journals and tactical annotations, steering her away from the shipwreck. Manifest for now. The historical value is immense, Dr. Chun declared after 30 minutes of examination. These materials provide unprecedented insight into naval intelligence operations during World War II. The academic community would consider this a significant discovery. That's why I contacted you first, Eleanor said, choosing her words deliberately. I want to ensure these materials are properly preserved and studied, but as the property owner, I also want to maintain appropriate oversight of how they're handled. Dr. Chun nodded, her expression thoughtful. The Maritime Historical Society would propose a collaborative approach. We could provide conservation expertise and academic resources while you maintain ownership rights. Our primary interest is ensuring these materials are preserved and made available to qualified researchers. This aligned with Eleanor's hopes for a balanced partnership rather than institutional appropriation of her discovery. What would that collaboration look like in practical terms? We would suggest documenting everything in situ first, then transferring select materials to our conservation lab for preservation work, Dr. Chun explained. All items would remain your property, with the Society serving as steward for research access under your authorization. The approach seemed reasonable, though Eleanor noted the historian hadn't mentioned the potential value of the shipwreck information. Either Dr. Chun hadn't yet recognized that aspect of the archive, or she was strategically focusing on academic value first. "There's something else you should know," Eleanor said. Deciding transparency with her chosen partner was essential. "I received an email from the Naval Historical Division yesterday, and last night 2 men with government identification conducted an uninvited inspection of the lighthouse." Dr. Chun's expression shifted to concern. "That's unusually aggressive." For initial contact, the Navy has protocols for historical discoveries that typically begin with formal written requests. "I thought it seemed premature," Eleanor agreed, "which is why I wanted to consult with an independent expert before responding." "You made the right decision," Dr. Chun assured her. "The Historical Society has extensive experience mediating between private property owners and government agencies. We can help ensure your rights are protected while facilitating appropriate historical preservation." As they continued discussing potential approaches, Eleanor carefully raised the subject of the shipwreck information. Some of Admiral Harrison's annotations appear to identify vessel locations with remarkable precision. Would that have particular historical significance? Dr. Chun's expression confirmed she understood the implication. Significant indeed. Accurate shipwreck locations from that era would be valuable to both historical research and potential recovery operations. Modern technology can reach wrecks that were inaccessible when these records were created. "And if some of those vessels contained valuable cargo?" Eleanor asked directly. The historian met her gaze with professional candor. "Maritime law is complex regarding salvage rights, particularly for wartime losses. However, as the discoverer of the location information, you would have certain legal standing in any recovery operations." She paused, considering her words carefully. "The Society has partnerships with ethical marine archaeology organizations that approach shipwreck recovery with both historical respect and recognition of discoverers' rights." This was precisely the type of balanced perspective Eleanor had. Hoped for acknowledgement of the financial potential without focusing exclusively on exploitation. As they concluded their initial assessment, Dr. Chun proposed a formal collaboration agreement that would protect Eleanor's ownership rights, while leveraging the Society's expertise and institutional connections. They scheduled a follow-up meeting with the Society's legal counsel to draft appropriate documents. "One more thing," Dr. Chun said as they climbed the stairs back to the kitchen. "Be cautious in your communications with the Naval Historical Division. Their interest may extend beyond academic documentation to classified information and sovereign immunity claims over military vessels." "I've been wondering about that," Eleanor admitted. "How much authority would they have over Admiral Harrison's personal records?" "That's the complexity," Dr. Chun explained. "The line between his official duties and personal documentation is legally ambiguous, especially for intelligence materials. The Society can help you navigate those distinctions effectively." After Dr. Chun departed, Eleanor felt cautiously optimistic about their potential partnership. The historian had demonstrated both expertise and respect for her position as property owner, a promising foundation for handling the complex challenges ahead. That evening, Eleanor carefully reviewed the photos she had taken of the archive. Contents focusing on the shipwreck manifest. 23 vessels with precisely recorded locations, each with cargo annotations indicating historical or material value. If even a fraction of these wrecks could be located and salvaged using modern technology, the potential value was enormous. Her research into maritime salvage law revealed that rights varied depending on the vessel type, location, and historical context. Military vessels remained under their nation's sovereignty regardless of time elapsed, though salvage operations could be authorized through appropriate channels. Merchant vessels carrying private cargo operated under different legal frameworks, with discoverers' rights often recognized in court precedents. The complexity of these overlapping jurisdictions and regulations reinforced Eleanor's instinct to proceed through partnerships rather than attempting to navigate these waters alone. Her planning was interrupted by a knock at her cottage door, unexpected at this hour. Opening it cautiously, she found Howard Brennan standing on her porch with an expression of concern. "Sorry to arrive unannounced," he said, "but I thought you should know people have been asking questions about you and your Lighthouse purchase." Eleanor invited him in, her senses heightened. "What kind of questions? And who's asking?" "Different types approaching different sources," Howard explained, settling at her small kitchen table. "A man who identified himself as a naval historian was at the county records office reviewing your purchase documentation. Separately, I was approached by someone claiming to represent a maritime salvage investment group, asking if I knew your renovation plans and whether you'd discovered anything historically significant at the property." This rapid escalation of outside interest was concerning. Barely 3 days had passed since her purchase, yet multiple parties were already converging on her discovery. The naval representative was expected given the email she'd received, but the salvage investment group suggested information was spreading through unofficial channels. "Thank you for letting me know," Eleanor said, offering Howard coffee. "I'm discovering that my lighthouse might have more historical significance than I initially realized." Howard's expression suggested he understood she was being deliberately vague. Historical properties often come with unexpected complications. "I've renovated enough of them to know that original ownership and usage can create modern-day interest from various quarters." He paused, stirring his coffee thoughtfully. "I'm happy to run interference if needed. After 30 years in this community, I know who can be trusted and who cannot." His offer of support was welcome, particularly given Eleanor's recent arrival in the area. "I appreciate that. I'm establishing a partnership with the Maritime Historical Society for proper documentation and preservation. Dr. Chun seems knowledgeable and trustworthy." "Sophia Chun has an excellent reputation," Howard confirmed. "Her background includes work with both academic institutions and government maritime agencies. Good choice for navigating complex historical waters." Their conversation shifted to practical renovation matters, but Howard's warning had added urgency to Eleanor's planning. The circle of awareness about her discovery was widening, and she needed to establish formal protection for both the archive and her rights before competing interests forced her into a defensive position. The following morning brought another unexpected development. An email arrived from someone identifying themselves as Marcus Vega, Senior Acquisition Specialist with Atlantic Heritage Salvage. The message was direct. "Ms. Fisher, congratulations on your Lighthouse acquisition. Our organization specializes in historical maritime recovery operations with a focus on World War II-era vessels. We understand the Point Harbor property may contain documentation relevant to our research interests. We would like to discuss a potential partnership that would be financially advantageous to both parties. Please call 305-555-7891 at your convenience to explore this opportunity." The timing and specificity of this approach confirmed Howard's warning word was spreading about the potential value of what she had discovered. Atlantic Heritage Salvage appeared to be the maritime salvage investment group that had approached Howard, now contacting her directly. A quick internet search revealed the company was a private salvage operation with several successful recovery projects involving 20th century shipwrecks, primarily in the Caribbean and South Atlantic. Their website emphasized ethical recovery practices and historical preservation partnerships, though several news articles highlighted controversies with government agencies over artifact ownership. Eleanor decided not to respond immediately to either this salvage company or the Naval Historical Division. Instead, she focused on accelerating her partnership with the Maritime Historical Society, which offered the most balanced approach to the competing values at stake: historical preservation, academic access, financial consideration, and respect for her property rights. Later that day, she met with Dr. Chun and the Society's legal counsel, Catherine Okafor, to formalize their collaboration agreement. The contract they proposed recognized Eleanor's ownership of both the Lighthouse property and all materials discovered within it, with the Society providing conservation services, academic expertise, and institutional support in exchange for research access and potential exhibition rights for select materials. Most importantly, the agreement included provisions for handling any financial opportunities arising from the discovery, including potential shipwreck salvage operations. The Society would help facilitate appropriate partnerships while ensuring Eleanor retained significant rights as the discoverer of the location information. This framework protects your interests while leveraging our institutional capabilities, Catherine explained. We've handled similar situations involving private historical discoveries with commercial potential. Eleanor reviewed the document carefully before signing. What about the Naval Historical Division's interest? How do we address their potential claims? The agreement includes provisions for government consultation, Catherine pointed out, indicating specific sections. We acknowledge sovereign immunity over military vessels, while establishing your discovery rights for location information and any privately owned cargo. The Society has established protocols for these negotiations. With the agreement signed, they implemented the first phase immediately: comprehensive documentation of the archive's contents by the Society's preservation specialists. A team arrived at the Lighthouse the following day, professionally photographing and cataloging every document, map, and artifact in Admiral Harrison's hidden room. As the documentation proceeded, Dr. Chun made an important discovery. Among the journals was a detailed explanation of Admiral Harrison's classification system for the shipwrecks he had tracked. He had categorized them into 3 groups: military vessels under naval jurisdiction, civilian vessels carrying military cargo under contract, and civilian vessels carrying private commercial goods. This distinction was crucial for navigating the complex legal landscape of salvage rights. Military vessels remained under government jurisdiction, regardless of time elapsed. Civilian vessels with military cargo occupied a gray area with potential for negotiated rights. Civilian vessels with commercial cargo offered the clearest path to traditional salvage claims. Of the 23 shipwrecks in Harrison's records, 7 were military vessels, 9 were civilian ships with military cargo, and 7 were purely commercial vessels. Several of these commercial vessels carried particularly valuable cargo, including the industrial diamonds on the William Crampton and art treasures aboard the SS Westmoreland. This categorization provided a strategic approach to the potential value of Harrison's information. By focusing initially on the commercial vessels, they could establish salvage operations without immediately confronting military jurisdictional challenges. With the documentation phase complete, the Society transported select materials to their conservation laboratory for preservation work. Eleanor maintained the original archive intact at the Lighthouse, now with improved security measures, installed by specialists recommended by Catherine. The formal partnership with the Maritime Historical Society had barely been established when the next development arrived: a registered letter from Captain Thomas Garrett, Director of Historical Archives, Naval History and Heritage Command. Dear Ms. Fisher, the United States Navy has been informed of your discovery of documents and materials related to Rear Admiral James Harrison's service during World War II, as these materials potentially contain information pertaining to naval operations and military vessels under continued United States sovereignty. We request a formal consultation at your earliest convenience. Please contact my office to arrange a meeting within the next 10 business days. This matter requires prompt attention to ensure proper handling of potentially sensitive historical materials. The tone was professional but carried clear institutional authority. Dr. Chun reviewed the letter and offered her assessment. This is standard procedure when privately held documents might contain military information. The good news is they're approaching through formal channels rather than simply asserting jurisdiction. Eleanor called the number provided and arranged a meeting at the Maritime Historical Society's offices rather than at the lighthouse itself. This neutral territory offered both symbolic and practical advantages, establishing her partnership with the Society as a mediating framework rather than dealing with the Navy directly. Captain Garrett arrived at the appointed time with a single colleague introduced as Dr. Evelyn Morris, the Navy's senior archivist for Atlantic operations. Both wore civilian clothes rather than uniforms, suggesting they were approaching this as an archival matter rather than a military assertion of authority. "Thank you for meeting with us, Miss Fisher," Captain Garrett began after introductions. Admiral Harrison's service to naval intelligence was significant, and any materials he maintained would be of considerable historical interest to our department. "I appreciate the Navy's historical interest," Eleanor replied carefully. "As you know, I've established a formal partnership with the Maritime Historical Society to ensure these materials are properly preserved and documented." Dr. Morris nodded approvingly. "The Society has an excellent reputation for conservation work. Our primary concern is identifying any materials that might contain classified operational information or specific tactical data that remains sensitive. This framing focusing on potential classification concerns rather than asserting ownership suggested a more collaborative approach than Eleanor had feared. Dr. Chun presented the cataloging work already completed, highlighting the historical context of Harrison's archives. The materials primarily document convoy protection strategies and anti-submarine tactics from 1942 to 1945, with post-war annotations through 1957. While historically significant, preliminary review suggests these would fall under declassification protocols for World War II operations. Captain Garrett reviewed the catalog with professional interest. Admiral Harrison was known for his meticulous record-keeping. His tactical innovation saved countless lives during the Battle of the Atlantic. He paused, studying Eleanor with measured assessment. "May I ask what you intend to do with these materials, Miss Fisher?" The question represented the true purpose of this meeting, determining her intentions and establishing the Navy's position regarding them. "My primary goal is ensuring proper historical preservation," Eleanor responded. "These materials document an important chapter in naval history that deserves scholarly attention and public understanding. The Society's expertise helps fulfill that responsibility." She deliberately omitted specific mention of the shipwreck information, waiting to see if the Navy representatives would raise the subject directly. Dr. Morris exchanged a glance with Captain Garrett before addressing the unspoken issue. "Our records indicate Admiral Harrison maintained detailed tracking of vessel losses during his command. These would have significant historical value for documenting the full impact of the Battle of the Atlantic." This careful phrasing confirmed the Navy was aware of the shipwreck documentation but was approaching it as historical information rather than salvage intelligence, at least initially. "Admiral Harrison's records do include vessel tracking information," Eleanor acknowledged. "Dr. Chun's team is assessing its historical significance and accuracy compared to official naval records." Captain Garrett nodded thoughtfully. The Navy would be interested in reviewing those specific materials. Some vessel locations remain incompletely documented in our official archives, particularly those lost in deep water operations. The conversation continued with discussion of potential collaboration between the Maritime Historical Society and Naval Historical Division for academic research using Harrison's archive. Throughout the meeting, Eleanor noted that the Navy representatives were carefully establishing interest without making direct claims or assertions of authority, a more measured approach than their initial uninvited inspection had suggested. As the meeting concluded, Captain Garrett presented a formal request for access to the archive for qualified Navy historians, particularly focusing on the vessel tracking information. "We would propose a joint research initiative that respects your ownership of these materials," while allowing our specialists to enhance our historical understanding of these operations. Eleanor promised to consider the proposal in consultation with the Maritime Historical Society, maintaining her position of deliberate cooperation without immediate commitments. After the Navy representatives departed, Dr. Chun offered her assessment. They're primarily interested in the shipwreck locations, but approaching cautiously through historical channels rather than asserting jurisdiction. That's actually a positive development. It suggests room for negotiation rather than confrontation. What's our best approach? Eleanor asked. Strategic transparency, Catherine advised. We acknowledge the vessel information exists and propose a research partnership that includes the Navy while maintaining your discovery rights. Their historical interest is legitimate, and including them appropriately strengthens your position. Regarding any future salvage operations, this balanced approach aligned with Eleanor's instincts. Creating adversarial relationships with government agencies would only complicate her situation, while thoughtful collaboration could help navigate the complex jurisdictional challenges surrounding shipwreck recovery. Over the next week, Eleanor continued dividing her time between practical lighthouse renovation planning and strategic management of the archive's implications. The initial safety work on the keeper's quarters had begun, with contractors reinforcing structural elements and securing the building against weather damage. Howard introduced her to grant specialists who helped prepare applications for historical preservation funding, identifying several programs specifically designed for lighthouse restoration. The Maritime Historical Society provided supporting documentation highlighting the property's enhanced historical significance due to Admiral Harrison's connection and the newly discovered archive. Meanwhile, Dr. Chun's conservation team had made remarkable progress preserving and digitizing the most fragile documents from the archive. Their work revealed additional details about Harrison's tracking methodology and the exceptional precision of his location data. His positioning information was decades ahead of its time in terms of accuracy, Dr. Chun explained during a progress update. He appears to have developed proprietary navigational calculations that exceeded standard naval protocols. Modern GPS verification of several known wreck locations confirms his coordinates are accurate within 50 meters, extraordinary for that era. This validation of the data's accuracy substantially increased the potential value of the shipwreck information. With confirmed precision, salvage operations could target specific locations with minimal search area, dramatically improving operational efficiency and success probability. As Eleanor reviewed these developments, another communication arrived from Atlantic Heritage Salvage, this time a formal proposal delivered by courier. Following our previous correspondence, Atlantic Heritage Salvage proposes an exclusive partnership for utilizing historical shipwreck location information discovered at Point Harbor Lighthouse. Our offer includes $250,000 immediate acquisition payment plus 30% of recovered value from any successful salvage operations conducted using this information. AHS would assume all operational costs and regulatory compliance responsibilities while providing full recognition of your discovery contribution. The proposal was signed by Marcus Vega as Senior Acquisition Specialist and included extensive company background materials highlighting their technical capabilities and previous successful recoveries. The financial terms were substantial. The immediate payment alone would fund complete restoration of the lighthouse and provide long-term security for Eleanor. However, the exclusive partnership language raised concerns about control and transparency in how the information would be utilized. Eleanor shared the proposal with Catherine Okafor, who identified several problematic aspects from a legal perspective. The exclusivity provision is particularly concerning, she noted. It would prevent you from working with academic or government partners on any recovery efforts, potentially including military vessels where such collaboration would be legally necessary. This assessment confirmed Eleanor's instinctive caution about private salvage operations that prioritize commercial recovery over historical integrity or legal complexity. While the financial offer was tempting, it represented a short-sighted approach to the archive's full potential. As these various interests continued converging on her lighthouse and its secrets, Eleanor found herself in an unexpected position of influence. What had begun as a desperate housing solution had transformed into a complex negotiation involving national historical assets, potential treasure recovery, and competing institutional agendas. The eviction from her cottage was now just 2 weeks away, yet that once overwhelming crisis seemed almost insignificant compared to the opportunities and challenges presented by Admiral Harrison's archive. Howard's guest room would provide temporary accommodation while the lighthouse renovation proceeded, and the various preservation grants were likely to cover most essential restoration costs. More importantly, the shipwreck information represented potential financial security far beyond her immediate housing needs if managed thoughtfully and ethically. The key was balancing the legitimate interests of historical preservation, academic research, government oversight, and her own rights as the property owner who had discovered these long-hidden records. As Eleanor watched contractors installing new windows in the keeper's quarters, she reflected on the remarkable chain of events that had led her here. The devastating loss of Daniel, the financial hardship of medical bills, the threat of homelessness, each painful setback had been a necessary step on the path to this lighthouse and its hidden archive. What had seemed like the end of security and stability had become an unexpected beginning. The widow who had spent her last $250 on abandoned property now stood at the center of historical discovery with the potential to transform both her future and our understanding of naval history. Admiral Harrison's carefully preserved records hadn't just documented the past. They had created new possibilities for the present, connecting his strategic vision across decades to provide both historical insight and unexpected opportunity. The responsibility of carrying this legacy forward would require the same careful planning and foresight that had characterized his original preservation efforts. As the sun began setting over the Atlantic, casting long shadows from the lighthouse tower across the newly repaired roof of the keeper's quarters, Eleanor felt a growing sense of purpose and direction. The path ahead remained complex, but for the first time since Daniel's death, the future held promise rather than merely uncertainty. The meeting room at the Maritime Historical Society headquarters buzzed with an energy Eleanor had rarely experienced in her teaching career. Representatives from 3 distinct organizations sat around the polished oak table, each with their own agenda regarding Admiral Harrison's archive and its shipwreck information. Dr. Chen and Catherine Okafor represented the Society's academic and legal interests. Captain Garrett and Dr. Morris attended for the Naval Historical Division. Marcus Vega and a marine archaeologist named Dr. Lauren Rivera represented Atlantic Heritage Salvage. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, a position that would have seemed inconceivable just weeks earlier. "Thank you all for agreeing to this joint discussion," Eleanor began, her teacher's voice carrying natural authority despite her nervousness. "Each of your organizations has expressed interest in different aspects of Admiral Harrison's archive. I believe a collaborative approach will best serve both historical preservation and appropriate utilization of this information." The proposal Eleanor had developed with Catherine's guidance represented a bold alternative to choosing between competing interests. Instead of exclusive partnerships or jurisdictional battles, she suggested a coordinated initiative that respected each organization's legitimate role while maintaining her position as the facilitating owner. "Rather than fragmented approaches to these shipwrecks, I'm proposing the formation of the Harrison Maritime Recovery Initiative," Eleanor explained, distributing detailed proposal documents to each attendee. This would be a structured collaboration between academic, government, and private salvage partners, with coordinated research and recovery operations guided by both historical significance and recovery value. The proposal outlined specific roles leveraging each organization's strengths. The Maritime Historical Society would provide historical context and conservation expertise for recovered artifacts. The Naval Historical Division would facilitate access to military vessels while maintaining appropriate jurisdiction. Atlantic Heritage Salvage would contribute technical recovery capabilities and operational funding. Most importantly, the initiative would follow a balanced approach to the 23 shipwrecks in Harrison's records, prioritizing them based on historical significance, recovery feasibility, and potential value rather than focusing exclusively on commercial considerations. This framework addresses the complex jurisdictional and ethical considerations while ensuring appropriate historical preservation, Eleanor concluded. It also provides sustainable funding through a shared value model that supports both ongoing operations and lighthouse restoration as the initiative's headquarters. The silence that followed her presentation lasted several seconds as the representative studied the detailed proposal. Marcus Vega from Atlantic Heritage Salvage spoke first. "This is considerably more sophisticated than the typical finder's approach to shipwreck information," he acknowledged, professional respect evident in his tone. "Though I note the recovery value share percentages differ significantly from our original proposal. The percentages reflect relative contributions and jurisdictional realities," Catherine explained. "Commercial vessels with private cargo follow traditional salvage distribution models. Military vessels and those with government cargo necessarily incorporate different frameworks." Captain Garrett studied the naval vessel provisions with particular attention. "You've incorporated appropriate sovereignty recognition for military vessels, while providing research participation for naval historians. This approach respects jurisdictional requirements while facilitating historical documentation." Dr. Chun added her perspective from the academic side. "The historical preservation protocols are excellent, particularly the comprehensive documentation requirements before any artifacts are disturbed. This ensures the archaeological context isn't sacrificed to recovery operations." The discussion continued for hours, with each organization raising specific concerns and suggesting modifications to various provisions. Throughout, Eleanor maintained her central role as the initiative's architect, demonstrating surprising facility with the complex intersection of maritime law, historical preservation, and salvage operations. By late afternoon, they had reached tentative agreement on a framework that balanced competing interests while providing appropriate recognition and compensation for all parties. Atlantic Heritage Salvage would provide operational funding and technical expertise in exchange for recovery percentages from commercial vessels. The Navy would facilitate access to military wrecks while maintaining sovereignty. The Maritime Historical Society would ensure proper historical protocols and artifact conservation. This initiative represents a new model for approaching historical shipwreck recovery, Dr. Chun observed as they concluded. Rather than adversarial claims or exclusive commercial exploitation, it creates a sustainable framework for balanced utilization of maritime heritage. Eleanor felt a quiet sense of accomplishment as the meeting ended. The lighthouse keepers' widow had successfully brought together institutional powers that normally operated in separate spheres, finding common ground in Admiral Harrison's meticulously preserved legacy. As the representatives gathered their materials, Marcus Vega approached Eleanor privately. "Most people who discover valuable shipwreck information either try to sell it to the highest bidder or get overwhelmed by legal complexities," he said. "Candidly, your approach is refreshingly thoughtful. Atlantic Heritage would be interested in discussing broader collaboration beyond the Harrison initiative if this partnership proves successful." This unexpected professional respect from a seasoned salvage executive confirmed Eleanor's growing confidence in her unexpected new role. What had begun as desperate survival had evolved into something that commanded attention from established experts in multiple fields. The following week brought the first tangible steps toward implementing the Harrison Maritime Recovery Initiative. Legal teams from each organization drafted formal agreements based on the framework Eleanor had proposed. Preliminary research teams began correlating Harrison's shipwreck data with modern navigational charts and historical naval records. Meanwhile, renovation work on the lighthouse keeper's quarters accelerated. With historical preservation grants approved and a percentage of Atlantic Heritage's initial funding allocated to restoration, Eleanor could implement a comprehensive rehabilitation plan rather than merely essential repairs. Howard introduced her to craftspeople specializing in historical restoration, and the keeper's quarters gradually transformed from abandoned shelter to comfortable living space that honored its maritime heritage. The original wood floors were carefully restored rather than replaced. Period-appropriate fixtures were installed throughout. Modern systems for heating, plumbing, and electricity were integrated with minimal disruption to historical elements. "You've found the perfect balance between preservation and livability," Howard observed during a site visit. Too many historical renovations either sacrifice comfort for authenticity or modernize away all character. Eleanor had moved from his guest room into the partially completed keeper's quarters, establishing her permanent residence while renovation continued around her. The lighthouse tower remained a longer-term project, requiring specialized engineering and materials that would take months to complete. The hidden room beneath the kitchen had been secured with an improved access system designed by security consultants, maintaining its concealed nature while providing better protection for the historical materials still stored there. Most of the critical documents had been professionally conserved and digitized, with originals returned to temperature-controlled storage cabinets installed in the archive room. 3 weeks after the initial joint meeting, the Harrison Maritime Recovery Initiative launched its first operational phase-detailed survey mapping of 3 priority shipwreck locations, using advanced sonar equipment from Atlantic Heritage. Salvage: the targets included 1 military vessel of historical significance and 2 commercial ships with valuable cargo. Eleanor joined the survey expedition aboard the research vessel Horizon, observing as marine archaeologists and salvage specialists used Admiral Harrison's coordinates to locate the first target, the SS Westmoreland, with its cargo of evacuated museum artifacts from occupied Europe. The operations center hummed with activity as sonar operators guided the vessel in careful patterns over the target area. High-resolution displays showed the ocean floor 3,200 feet below, gradually building a detailed map of the search zone. "Harrison's coordinates put us within 43 meters of the wreck site," the lead technician explained, pointing to the sonar display. "That's remarkable precision for calculations made in the 1940s without modern navigation technology." Eleanor watched in fascination as ghostly images began forming on the monitors, the unmistakable outline of a large vessel resting on the ocean floor, its structure still largely intact despite decades underwater. The ship's identity was confirmed through distinctive features matching historical photographs of the Westmoreland. "Preliminary imaging suggests minimal hull deterioration," Dr. Rivera reported, studying the high-resolution scans. "The cargo holds appear sealed, which significantly improves preservation prospects for any contents." This validation of Harrison's records represented a crucial milestone. The precision of his location data confirmed the archive's practical value beyond its historical significance. More importantly, the apparent condition of the wreck suggested recovery operations would be viable despite the significant depth. Over the next 3 days, the expedition successfully located all 3 target vessels, each within 50 meters of Harrison's recorded coordinates. The military vessel, a destroyer escort sunk in 1944, would remain undisturbed beyond documentation. Under Navy jurisdiction, The two commercial vessels would proceed to recovery assessment once survey mapping was complete. When the Horizon returned to port, media representatives waited at the dock. The Harrison Initiative partners had agreed on controlled publicity once initial surveys confirmed viable targets. Dr. Chun handled most communications, emphasizing the historical significance while Eleanor maintained a more limited public profile. As the lighthouse owner who had discovered the records, the following week's headline in the Regional Maritime Journal captured the expedition's success. Admiral's secret maps lead to significant World War II shipwreck discoveries. National media quickly picked up the story, focusing on the romantic elements. Widow's lighthouse purchase revealing naval secrets and lost treasure. Eleanor found herself declining interview requests from national morning shows and documentary producers, preferring to maintain focus on the initiative's work rather than personal attention. Her years in education had taught her that sustainable results came from consistent effort rather than momentary recognition. The successful survey expedition accelerated the initiative's development. With confirmed targets and promising recovery prospects, Atlantic Heritage committed full operational funding for the first salvage mission targeting the William Crampton with its cargo of industrial diamonds, the most commercially valuable target with the least complicated legal status as a civilian merchant vessel. Recovery planning revealed the technical complexity of deep-water salvage operations. The Crampton rested at 2,700 feet, requiring specialized equipment and expertise. Atlantic Heritage assembled a team including marine engineers, salvage technicians, and archaeological specialists to ensure both recovery success and historical documentation. Eleanor's role evolved from discovery facilitator to active participant in strategic planning. Her background in education proved unexpectedly valuable for coordinating between technical specialists, academic researchers, and institutional representatives, translating specialized knowledge across disciplines and ensuring effective collaboration. You have a remarkable ability to help experts communicate across their professional boundaries, Dr. Chun observed during a planning session. That's often the greatest challenge in multidisciplinary projects. The weeks leading up to the recovery operation brought another significant development. The sealed envelope from Admiral Harrison's archive marked Activation Protocol, Facility B, and referencing a secondary location remained an unresolved question. After consultation with the initiative partners, Eleanor decided circumstances warranted opening it under controlled documentation. The envelope contained a single page of instructions written in Harrison's distinctive hand, along with a small brass key. In the event of compromise or necessity, essential duplication of strategic materials is secured at secondary location. Access via Northeastern Lighthouse Service Tunnel, 3rd Maintenance Alcove. Key opens equipment cabinet 7C containing activation sequence for secure storage compartment. Coordinates and tactical materials preserved with redundant encryption. JH. This cryptic message suggested another hidden storage location, somewhere within the lighthouse itself, separate from the archive room they had already discovered. The Northeastern Lighthouse Service Tunnel, likely referred to one of the maintenance passages, built into the tower's base for accessing mechanical systems and structural elements. The following day, Eleanor led a careful exploration of the lighthouse tower's lower levels, identifying the service tunnel referenced in Harrison's note. The narrow passage contained maintenance alcoves at regular intervals, each housing mechanical equipment for the lighthouse's original operation. The third alcove contained an equipment cabinet labeled 7C, secured with a lock that accepted the brass key from Harrison's envelope. Inside was another sealed document and what appeared to be an early electronic device with a numeric keypad. The document provided activation instructions for the device, explaining that it would unlock a concealed storage compartment built into the lighthouse foundation. The required sequence combined Harrison's identification number with the lighthouse's original activation date. When Eleanor entered the sequence, a hydraulic mechanism activated in the alcove floor, revealing a watertight compartment approximately 3 feet square. Inside was a metal document case containing what appeared to be duplicate copies of the most sensitive materials from the main archive, particularly detailed shipwreck coordinates and cargo manifests. Most significantly, the case included materials not present in the main archive, detailed technical drawings of experimental naval technology from late war development programs, and what appeared to be early Cold War defense planning documents, with classification markings. These materials represented a different category of historical sensitivity than the shipwreck records. After careful consultation with legal counsel, Eleanor arranged an immediate meeting with Captain Garrett to ensure appropriate handling of potentially classified historical documents. The Naval Historical Division responded with appropriate seriousness, sending a specialized team to assess the document's current classification status. Many had been automatically declassified through age-based protocols, but others retained sensitive elements requiring formal review. Admiral Harrison's position gave him access to developmental programs not fully documented in public historical records. Captain Garrett explained during their review session. These materials provide valuable historical context for naval technology evolution during the crucial transition from World War II to Cold War postures. Rather than asserting confiscation authority, the Navy proposed incorporating these additional materials into the existing Harrison Initiative framework with appropriate security protocols for any documents that retain sensitivity. This measured approach further validated Eleanor's collaborative model, demonstrating that even potentially classified historical materials could be handled through partnership rather than institutional confrontation. As autumn arrived, bringing dramatic Atlantic storms that showcased the lighthouse's resilience, final preparations for the Crampton recovery operation neared completion. Atlantic Heritage's specialized salvage vessel arrived in port, equipped with remote-operated vehicles capable of precision work at significant depths. Eleanor stood on the lighthouse observation deck, watching the salvage ship's lights on the horizon as evening approached. The keeper's quarters below had been transformed into a comfortable home that honored both the building's maritime heritage and her personal needs. The renovation had balanced historical authenticity with modern function, creating living space that felt both timeless and practical. Howard joined her on the deck, having become a regular visitor and valuable advisor as the lighthouse restoration progressed. "Hard to believe it's been only 4 months since the auction," he observed, leaning against the newly restored railing. "From desperate housing solution to heading a major historical recovery initiative, that's quite a journey." Eleanor smiled, watching the salvage vessel's lights as it positioned for the next day's operation. "Sometimes I still expect to wake up back in my cottage with the eviction notice on the counter. All of this seems impossible when I consider where I started." "Not impossible," Howard corrected gently. "Improbable perhaps, but clearly not impossible since you're living it. The question is what you've learned from the journey." His question prompted reflection beyond the practical outcomes of her lighthouse purchase. "I've learned that what appears to be an ending can actually be a beginning in disguise," she said after a thoughtful pause. "Daniel's death and my financial collapse seemed like the end of everything secure in my life. The eviction notice felt like the final blow." She gestured toward the ocean and the salvage vessel preparing for the next day's historic recovery. "Yet those very losses created the circumstances that led me here, to discovery and opportunity I never could have imagined. If security had remained, I would never have considered an abandoned lighthouse at a bankruptcy auction." Howard nodded, understanding the deeper truth in her observation. The greatest opportunities often appear disguised as insurmountable problems. The key is recognizing possibility within apparent disaster. This perspective had transformed Eleanor's understanding of not just her recent experiences, but her approach to life itself. The desperate gamble that had seemed like her last option had instead been the first step toward an unexpected renaissance professionally, financially, and personally. The recovery operation the following day exceeded even optimistic projections. The remote vehicle successfully located the Crampton's cargo hold containing the industrial diamonds, recovering specialized containers still sealed after 8 decades underwater. Preliminary assessment by gemological experts confirmed the diamonds had remained stable in their specialized storage, protected from environmental degradation by their inherent durability and the container's integrity. The market value of this single recovery, even accounting for complex salvage rights distribution, would provide Eleanor with financial security beyond anything she had imagined possible after Daniel's death. More importantly, the successful operation validated the Harrison Initiative's collaborative approach, demonstrating that balanced partnership could achieve results beyond what any single organization could accomplish independently. As media coverage of the recovery spread, the initiative received inquiries from other maritime historical organizations and government agencies interested in applying similar collaborative frameworks to shipwreck projects worldwide. The model Eleanor had developed was establishing new standards for how historical maritime resources could be approached, respecting both preservation values and recovery opportunities without sacrificing either to exclusive interests. 6 months after purchasing the abandoned lighthouse for $250, Eleanor hosted a formal dedication ceremony for the fully restored Point Harbor lighthouse and the officially established headquarters of the Harrison Maritime Recovery Initiative. Representatives from partner organizations, historical preservation societies, and local government attended the event, which celebrated both the physical restoration and the innovative historical recovery program it had spawned. During the ceremony, Dr. Chun unveiled a permanent exhibition in the Lighthouse Visitor Center, documenting Admiral Harrison's contributions to naval intelligence and the remarkable precision of his shipwreck records. The exhibition carefully balanced public historical education with appropriate discretion regarding recovery operations still in progress. Captain Garrett presented Eleanor with a formal letter of appreciation from the Naval Historical Command, recognizing her exemplary stewardship of historically significant materials and commitment to preserving naval heritage through innovative collaborative approaches. Perhaps most meaningfully, several descendants of Admiral Harrison attended the dedication, having been located through the Naval Historical Division's assistance. His granddaughter, herself a retired naval officer, presented Eleanor with her grandfather's personal compass that had accompanied him throughout his service. "He would have approved of how you've handled his legacy," she told Eleanor during the presentation. "His career was built on finding paths through complex situations while respecting both mission requirements and human considerations. Your initiative embodies that same balanced approach." As the formal ceremony concluded and guests explored the beautifully restored lighthouse, Eleanor found a quiet moment alone in the lantern room at the tower's top. The space had been meticulously restored with both historical accuracy and modern safety considerations. The massive Fresnel lens returned to its original position through a special arrangement with the Coast Guard Historical Division. From this vantage point, she could see the research vessel departing for the next recovery operation, the salvage ship returning to port with recently recovered artifacts, and visitors exploring the grounds of what had become both her home and a living historical site. The widow who had spent her last $250 on an abandoned lighthouse now stood as the founder and director of an internationally recognized historical recovery initiative, the owner of a beautifully restored historical property, and the catalyst for a new model of collaborative maritime preservation. As the autumn sun began to set over the Atlantic, casting the distinctive shadow of the lighthouse across the waters where Admiral Harrison had once tracked German U-boats, Eleanor reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had transformed apparent disaster into unprecedented opportunity. The lighthouse that had been her desperate last resort had become a beacon in more ways than one, illuminating not just maritime navigation, but a path forward from loss to renewal, from ending to beginning, from desperation to possibility. What had started as a simple need for shelter had evolved into purpose, security, and contribution far beyond anything she could have imagined when facing eviction from her cottage. The story wasn't just about discovering hidden treasure, it was about recognizing that our greatest challenges often contain within them the seeds of our most remarkable opportunities, if we have the courage to pursue unconventional paths when traditional options disappear. As darkness fell and the restored lighthouse beam activated automatically, sweeping across the waters with the same purpose it had served for over a century, Eleanor Fisher, teacher, widow, lighthouse keeper, and now maritime history preservationist, embraced the unexpected journey that had brought her home. 1 year after Eleanor Fisher's life-changing purchase at the county auction, the Point Harbor Lighthouse stood transformed. No longer abandoned and weathered, it gleamed with fresh white paint against the blue Atlantic sky, its light once again functioning as both a navigational aid and a symbol of renewal. Eleanor sat at her desk in what had once been the lighthouse keeper's study, reviewing reports from the latest Harrison Initiative recovery operation. Through her window, the October sunrise cast golden light across the water, illuminating the research vessel returning to harbor after a successful expedition. The past year had unfolded with accomplishments that would have seemed impossible when she first received her eviction notice. The Harrison Maritime Recovery Initiative had successfully located and documented all 23 shipwrecks from the Admiral's records. Recovery operations had been completed on 4 vessels, with 2 more currently in progress. The collaborative approach she had established had become a model discussed in international maritime preservation conferences. A knock at her door interrupted her review. Howard entered carrying fresh coffee and pastries from the village bakery, their Friday morning tradition since the lighthouse renovation had been completed. "The Historical Preservation Society called," he announced, setting breakfast on the small table overlooking the harbor. "They've selected Point Harbor for their annual Achievement Award. The ceremony's in Washington next month." Eleanor smiled, adding this news to the growing list of recognitions the project had received. From bankruptcy auction to national award in 12 months. "I still have moments when none of this seems real. Reality is often the least believable story," Howard replied, taking his usual seat by the window. "Speaking of stories, have you made a decision about the book proposal?" The proposal from Atlantic Historical Press had arrived the previous week, an offer to publish Eleanor's account of discovering Admiral Harrison's archive and establishing the Recovery Initiative. The publisher envisioned a book that combined historical significance, personal journey, and practical insights into collaborative approaches to maritime preservation. "I'm still considering it," Eleanor admitted, joining him at the table. "Writing a book wasn't exactly in my plans when I bought a lighthouse for shelter." Howard's expression turned thoughtful. "Very little about your past year has followed conventional plans. That's precisely what makes your story compelling, how necessity drove innovation, how desperation led to discovery." This perspective resonated with Eleanor's own reflection on her journey. What had begun as desperate survival had evolved into something that transcended personal circumstances to create lasting impact in multiple domains. Their conversation was interrupted by Eleanor's phone signaling an incoming video call from Dr. Chun aboard the research vessel. Howard excused himself as Eleanor accepted the call, knowing it likely contained updates from the current recovery operation. Dr. Chun's excitement was evident even through the small screen. "Eleanor, you need to see what we've just recovered from the Matterhorn site." The camera panned to show a large metal container being carefully opened by conservation specialists in the ship's laboratory. Inside lay rows of carefully packed artwork paintings protected by custom wooden frames with cork insulation. As technicians gently removed the first piece, Eleanor gasped at the unmistakable style of the Dutch masters. The painting depicted a domestic interior scene with distinctive light effects characteristic of Vermeer. Initial authentication suggests, "This is indeed Woman Reading a Letter by Johannes Vermeer," Dr. Chun explained, her voice reverent. One of the works recorded in Harrison's manifest is evacuated from Rotterdam before the German occupation. It's been considered lost for over 80 years. The significance of this discovery transcended even the substantial financial value of previous recoveries. This wasn't merely treasure, it was cultural heritage believed destroyed during wartime, now returned to humanity through Admiral Harrison's meticulous records and Eleanor's initiative. The conservation team believes all 11 paintings listed in Harrison's manifest are present and in remarkably stable condition, Dr. Chun continued. The specialized packing created a microenvironment that protected against humidity and temperature fluctuations. When you purchased this lighthouse, you were seeking basic shelter. Each discovery since then has expanded not just what you found, but what you've become capable of doing. The question isn't whether you can lead this expanded initiative. Demonstrated that capacity repeatedly. The question is whether this next evolution aligns with your personal vision. This framing resonated with Eleanor's reflections earlier that day. Her journey hadn't been a single discovery, but a series of expansions, each building on previous foundations while requiring new growth and adaptation. "I need to visit the archive room," she said suddenly, rising from the table. "There's something. I want to check before we discuss this further." Her guests understood the significance of the hidden room beneath the kitchen, the original discovery that had launched everything that followed. They followed as Eleanor activated the concealed entrance, revealing the staircase leading to Admiral Harrison's archive. The room had been transformed since her initial discovery. Professional conservation equipment maintained optimal temperature and humidity for the historical materials. Advanced security systems protected both physical access and digital documentation. Specialized storage units had replaced the original filing cabinets, preserving Harrison's organizational system while providing superior protection. Eleanor moved to the small desk where she had first discovered Harrison's logbook. Opening the leather-bound volume, she turned to the final entries from 1957, reading aloud an excerpt she had revisited many times. This archive represents one node in a network of historical preservation, each securing different aspects of our operational knowledge. Future generations may require this information when present circumstances have evolved beyond current limitations. The path between nodes exists for those with perspective to recognize connection beyond coincidence. The passage had initially seemed like philosophical reflection. Now, with Captain Garrett's revelation about potential additional archives, it appeared more literal, a deliberate clue embedded by a strategic mind planning decades ahead. He created a historical treasure hunt, Dr. Chun realized, examining the passage with new understanding. Each archive containing clues to the next, preserved until someone connected the elements. Which is exactly what Captain Garrett's analysts believe they're detecting in the technical materials, Eleanor confirmed. Patterns that form navigational markers to additional preservation sites. The implications extended beyond just finding more historical materials. Admiral Harrison had created a system that required collaborative effort to fully access. A design that necessitated the very approach Eleanor had independently developed through her initiative. This wasn't just about preserving historical materials, she realized. It was about encouraging a specific approach to historical preservation, itself one that balanced institutional interests through collaborative methodology. The Admiral's strategic foresight had extended beyond preserving historical records to influencing how future generations would approach such discoveries. Eleanor's initiative hadn't just implemented her own collaborative vision. It had fulfilled Harrison's long-term design for how his preserved materials would be utilized. As they returned upstairs and resumed their discussion, a new perspective emerged. Expanding the initiative to locate additional archives wouldn't just extend their current work, it would complete the system Harrison had intentionally created, revealing historical connections deliberately preserved for future discovery. "I believe we should proceed," Eleanor decided after thorough consideration. "We'll establish a dedicated research division within the existing initiative framework, focusing on decoding Harrison's location markers while maintaining our current recovery operations." The decision felt right, not just continuing what they had started, but fulfilling its deeper purpose. Whatever additional discoveries awaited in Harrison's network of historical preservation, the approach would remain consistent with both his apparent intentions and Eleanor's established methodology. The following morning, Eleanor walked along the lighthouse observation deck, watching dawn illuminate the Atlantic horizon. The research vessel was preparing for departure, continuing recovery operations on the Matterhorn site with its precious cargo of lost artwork. In the harbor beyond, fishing boats headed out for their daily work, continuing the maritime traditions that had defined this coast for centuries. The integration of past and present, historical preservation, and ongoing productivity reflected the philosophy that had guided Eleanor throughout this journey. History wasn't meant to be isolated in museums or academic journals. It lived in connection with contemporary application, each informing and enhancing the other. Howard joined her on the deck, respecting her reflective silence while offering companionship. After several minutes, Eleanor shared her decision regarding the book proposal. "I've decided to accept the publisher's offer," she said, "but with a different approach than they suggested. Rather than focusing primarily on my personal journey, I want to document the collaborative methodology we've developed, creating a practical guide for balancing competing interests in historical preservation." Howard nodded approvingly. Taking what began as personal necessity and transforming it into principles others can apply to their own challenges. "That's consistent with everything you've done since purchasing this lighthouse." His observation captured the evolution that had defined Eleanor's path from seeking personal shelter to creating frameworks that served broader purposes. What began as desperate survival had become a vehicle for lasting contribution. As the morning light strengthened, illuminating the lighthouse in gold, Eleanor considered the extraordinary chain of circumstances that had led to this moment. The devastating loss of Daniel, the financial collapse that followed, the eviction notice that had seemed like final defeat. Each apparent ending had actually been a beginning in disguise, each closed door revealing unexpected pathways beyond. "The publisher wants to title the book, 'The Lighthouse Keeper's Discovery,'" she told Howard. "But I'm suggesting an alternative, 'Beacons of Possibility, Finding Opportunity in Crisis.'" "Much better," Howard agreed. "It captures the universal principle beyond the specific circumstances. That principle, finding opportunity within crisis, possibility within constraint, had transformed Eleanor's understanding of adversity itself. What appeared as limitations often created the very conditions necessary for innovation, forcing creativity that comfort never required. Later that day, Eleanor conducted her weekly video call with the educational outreach team developing curriculum materials based on the Harrison Initiative. What had begun as simple lighthouse tours had evolved into comprehensive educational programs connecting history, archaeology, conservation, and collaborative governance. The university partnership has expanded to 5 additional institutions. The education director reported, "They're particularly interested in the cross-disciplinary approach, how the initiative bridges traditionally separate academic domains." This educational impact represented yet another unexpected outcome from Eleanor's lighthouse purchase. Beyond the specific historical discoveries and recovery operations, the initiative was influencing how institutions approached complex challenges, requiring multiple perspectives and balanced interests. After concluding the call, Eleanor reviewed Preliminary research from the newly established team working to decode Harrison's location markers. Early analysis suggested connections to lighthouse locations along the northeastern seaboard, potentially identifying additional properties where the Admiral might have established preservation archives. The prospect of continuing this historical treasure hunt, following clues deliberately left by a strategic mind decades earlier, filled Eleanor with renewed purpose. Whatever challenges and discoveries lay ahead, the approach would remain consistent, thoughtful collaboration balancing legitimate interests rather than competition or exclusion. As evening approached, Eleanor climbed the spiral staircase to the lantern room at the lighthouse's summit. The massive Fresnel lens had been restored to full operation, its intricate glass prisms magnifying light into a powerful beam visible for miles across the darkening waters. From this vantage point, she could see the full scope of what her desperate $250 purchase had become. The beautifully restored keeper's quarters below, now both comfortable home and initiative headquarters. The visitor center welcoming students and researchers from around the world. The research vessels in the harbor continuing recovery operations based on Harrison's meticulous records. Most importantly, she recognized how profoundly her own identity had transformed through this journey. The widow seeking basic shelter had become a recognized innovator in historical preservation, maritime recovery, and collaborative governance. The teacher facing financial ruin had become an educator on an international scale, sharing methodologies that transcended her specific discovery. What defined this transformation wasn't just the circumstances, the lucky discovery of valuable historical materials, but the approach she had brought to those circumstances. When faced with competing claims and complex challenges, she had sought balance rather than exclusion, collaboration rather than confrontation, innovation rather than convention. As darkness fell and the lighthouse beam activated automatically, sweeping across the waters with its guiding light, Eleanor Fisher embraced the continuing journey that had begun with desperation but evolved into possibility. The lighthouse that had once represented her last hope now stood as a beacon illuminating pathways for others navigating their own challenging waters. The eviction notice that had arrived on that foggy morning a year earlier hadn't been an ending, but the first page of an unexpected new chapter. One that continued unfolding with possibilities beyond anything she could have imagined when placing her desperate bid at the county auction. The widow who had spent her last $250 on an abandoned lighthouse had discovered not just Admiral Harrison's hidden archive, but her own capacity for transformation and contribution. The secret basement revealing lost war maps had ultimately revealed something far more valuable: the power of seeing possibility where others saw only problems, opportunity where circumstances suggested only limitation. As the lighthouse beam completed another revolution, illuminating first the rocky shore below, then the harbor beyond, and finally the distant horizon where possibilities awaited discovery, Eleanor Fisher, teacher, widow, lighthouse keeper, and now steward of historical legacy, embraced the truth that had defined her remarkable journey. Our greatest challenges often contain within them the seeds of our most extraordinary opportunities, if we have the courage and creativity to recognize them. The light from Point Harbor Lighthouse continued its steady rhythm through the darkness, not just guiding vessels to safe harbor, but illuminating a principle that transcended its stone tower and brilliant beam, that what appears as ending often conceals beginning. What seems like limitation often catalyzes innovation, and what begins as desperate survival can evolve into profound contribution that extends far beyond our individual circumstances to light pathways for others. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.